Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic. It is time to talk about how my brand new 150 gram combat robot, Not Enough Side, performed at ARC's September meet. This was a wild and crazy idea I had, and the build video happened last weekend. If you missed that, I will leave a link to it in the end card and in the description down below. I will say too, before we get started, this is ARC's September meet. The Antweight arena is being put back into the Beta-weight arena, and unfortunately the pits are broken again. So if you have issues with pits being open for the entire fight, skip this video, just move on. But speaking of moving on, we're going to move on into our first fight, and that is up against a robot called Broomhilda, which is a fairly scary undercutter. So this is kind of going to be a trial by fire for old Not Enough Side here. So it works, and it works well. What? This was like almost supposed to be a joke robot. Like I did not expect it to work. I mean, the first hit had me really nervous because Broomhilda managed to get a nice shot on the side and put a nice little hole in our PLA print, which is what happens when you don't print ABS chassis. And it kind of actually just got better from there, because after that shot there was another shot where they peeled up some HDPE on our front armor, and then their weapon broke. And then it was all me for the rest of that fight. This weapon is really interesting. Having it mounted so far out means that turning is a time, because you can't really turn away from the weapon so well. You can turn towards the weapon really easily, but you can't turn away from it so much. Normally, because this is a tank steer, it should spin on the spot. However, yeah, turning away from the weapon, it drives a nice big arc, but turning towards, it does a nice little spin. So yeah, that was a interesting one to working out in the middle of the fight with the weapon going full speed and trying not to get hit and trying to hit. It was a time. But having said that, this weapon hits significantly hard. I've gone up against Steve and his foam wheels before and have had a lot of trouble trying to do anything to them at all, but somehow with this weapon made of PCBs and hand-cut steel, I managed to not only break one but also rip a whole motor out of his chassis, which is just mind-blowing to me, especially considering I think this is the smallest weapon I've ever run in an ant weight. It is 14 grams all told, fully mounted up onto the motor here, which is wild to me. Even the laser cut stuff, the smallest laser cut bar I have is 19 grams. So we're a full 5 grams under that, and we're hitting really, really hard. Hard enough, as I said, to rip a whole motor out and basically high side him on his own chassis, giving us our very first win, which, again, I was not expecting that. And at this point, I thought I was going to be all out of luck. I basically took the robot out, duct taped the lid back down because the lid broke a little bit in that previous fight, and threw it right back in against Willie Wagtail, which is a very, very fast, very scary vertical spinner. Aha! Yeah! We won a second fight in a... What is happening right now? This is ridiculous. I mean, the second hit into this fight and we broke his weapon. That is 2 weapons that we've broken very, very early into fights, which means that we've had run of the arena, effectively, being the only weapon in the fight. We broke Willie Wagtail's weapon fairly easily. We smacked the side and it dropped the shaft of his weapon out. I'm pretty sure he's running like a belt drive up to his weapon running on a shaft. And so we hit that and knocked it straight on out of there. From then on out, I was trying to work out how best to be using this weird weapon style. I found that like spinning backwards into somebody was kind of interesting as a way of getting the weapon to engage. But the thing that actually really worked there was the straight shot drive at him when he tried to dodge, and I slammed the wheel instead, and that just knocked the wheel off entirely. But as you could see though, he was very, very fast, so it was hard to actually get those shots on him until I managed to get that one wheel, and then he was down on a single wheel, and look, from there, it was all a game of trying to get my weirdly placed weapon into his second wheel. And while I didn't knock the wheel off entirely, I did manage to knock the silicon off the outside of the tire, like the tire off the actual hub, and that is what jammed him up in the end. It looks like in the footage he gets high-sided on something, but it's not actually that. It's more about the fact that silicon got knocked off and jams up in his drive mechanism, and his wheels cannot spin anymore. So we won that fight, and even if I tried to smack him around a little bit more, there was nothing that could be done to get that back up and running again, because once that silicon's off, you basically need to put it back on by hand. And next up we have Night Dozer. This is Anti-Dozer put down into the A-League category. It's got a nice big metallic wedge, a 2-wheel front drive, and 2 kind of sacrificial loose tires that sit at the back. This was honestly, I think, the best ant weight fight that I have ever had. Going into this fight, I was actually a little bit worried because for the first time I considered what would happen if I got flipped upside down, and I realized that if I got flipped upside down, I'd be running on the weapon bolt and on one wheel, and the other wheel just would not be touching at all. It turns out that in this fight, that exact thing happened, and what we actually managed to do was get force out of the nut. So the nut touched the ground, and while it was spinning, it imparted a small amount of force, which meant that while I was driving only on one wheel, if I drove backwards, the whole robot moved backwards, and if I tried to drive forwards, then the whole robot turned on the spot around the weapon, which wasn't a lot of control, but it was enough control to keep me engaged with Night Dozer, and meant that I was able to land that second shot, which threw me up and got me up, like gyroing around the arena, which was beautiful. Just insanity. And then I got very lucky and landed back on my wheel, so I was able to get back into the fight. I will say, this weapon hits really hard. They have a nice thick aluminium front panel on that robot. I think it's aluminium, and we were doing some nice damage, especially when we were catching the edge of it. We managed to cut a nice big little nick out of that, which I was very surprised about. This weapon system, I've just blowing my mind at this point. The other thing, of course, that blows my mind is that we managed to get him in the pit with 1 second left on the clock. At 40 seconds left, you can hear that being called in the footage. We're all kind of like over in the back corner, and I managed to then push him back closer to the pit. He dodges me a couple of times, almost manages to get out of the way, and then, yeah, as the 10 count is happening, he gets himself into trouble. I capitalize on that and just push him into the pit, which, like, oh my god, the timing on that was incredible, basically. There was also a point, I guess I should mention in there, where pushing him up against that wall, I did spin the spinner down for a half a second, and then, because I was like, well, maybe if I spin the spinner down, I'll have a little bit more control, but realistically, the spinner being active or inactive doesn't actually matter with how much steering I have. It's just because there's so much weight on one side of the robot that I end up with no steering. So, you know, having the weapon up to speed was much better because it meant that if he tried to escape, the spinner was right there between him and the pit and where he wanted to go. So you basically had to invite another hit to get out of the place, which could have ricocheted him into the pit. But at the end, I didn't need that. And I don't know what is happening. This robot that was thrown together in 2 days has now won 3 fights in a row, and we are almost out of our round robin bracket. Our round robin bracket had the 3 that we've had before, and Alpha. Alpha is a brand new wedgie robot that I had never fought before, and unfortunately for it, it had a tough time through the bracket up to this point, getting wrecked by both Broomhilda and Willie Wagtail. So when it got into the arena against me, it was mostly made of duct tape. So, that was interesting, and we need to talk about the kind of main thing that should have been apparent during that fight. I had no weapon, and I had no weapon that I didn't realize. I put it into the arena, everything kind of beeped a little bit, and then I powered everything up, and I did not get spin out of my weapon, and that was confusing, to say the least. Because I thought everything should be working. It all worked against Night Dozer. There was no reason it should have stopped working. It wasn't until I pulled it out of the arena after the fight that I realized that the weapon motor had been broken. So this is the crazy thing. I was here to test these PCBs as a weapon, and I have broken a motor underneath the weapon without breaking the weapon. This system works way too well, I think. It's very, very interesting, and I definitely think we need to do a tutorial on this because, like, people need to be making PCB weapons. They are phenomenal, as it turns out. That, of course, does mean that this fight then boiled down to a pushing match between me and a very broken Wedge. Neither of us are very low, so it's kind of 50-50 as to who gets under who in any given push. I was kind of thinking that this fight might go in his favor and I might lose my first fight because, of course, while he can drive perfectly well, even though he's half made of duct tape, I still have this added mass of the weapon, which meant that my driving was still a bit weird and a bit twitchy, and I did end up basically over the pit and managed to escape. While I was doing that, he tried to close in and capitalize and accidentally ended up over the pit himself, and I managed to quickly slip around there and push him down the pit myself. So that was possibly one of the weirder fights that was going to happen this weekend because we were both in weird levels of broken, despite only one of us knowing that before going into the arena. But that also means that we have got 4 for 4. We have won 4 fights in a row with this brand new weird weapon system, and this is performing beyond what I ever thought it would possibly do in competition. So we're now out of our round robin group. We're going on through into the finals, and our first opponent up is Blade Tip, a robot specifically designed to tackle spinners.
3, 2, 1, go!
So obviously going into this fight, I had put a new weapon motor in so that we could spin, and hopefully win, and in actual fact, it did indeed help us. We had a very early pit escape, which was quite nice. I don't like going in the pit, especially early on in a fight. And we were doing some damage to Blade Tip. He's got nice big titanium prongs on him, so it's hard to do a lot of damage to the actual chassis of the robot. But as it turns out, we didn't need to, because what we actually did is a little quick 1-2 punch. One hit the back elevated spikes and bent one of them down and out. And then as we spun around, we hit him again and popped him back into a wheelie and got that bent spike caught in underneath the actual separator divider in the Beetleweight arena that makes up the little Antweight arenas that we're actually fighting in, which that shouldn't happen, basically. And if it was any other fight other than a finals fight, I would have dropped him back down. But at this point in time, we are now 5 wins in a row. And in through to the finals, I had to see how far we could go here. So I left him there and he got counted out. And that was that fight. Which, again, I just... side-mounted weapon. Apparently, this is fucking awesome. But of course that means it is time to move on to the finals, and we are up against Antimatter. This is a very, very low, very well driven wedge we've fought and had a lot of difficulty against in the past.
3, 2, 1, go!
And here is where our winning streak comes to an end. We get 2nd overall for the competition with a brand new robot, which, like, mind blown for the 5th or 6th time in this particular event. But yeah, Antimatter is very well driven, very well armored, and we didn't really do particularly well there. I mean, there's two factors here. So Rowan, who drives Antimatter, did a great job of getting around behind me using the fact that my turning in one direction isn't that great. He managed to do that very, very well. And then he got me over into the right point. So that section right underneath the camera where we were was perfect placement for this robot to be in all sorts of trouble, because I could turn a little bit, but I was turning towards the weapon, and that causes weird movements, which is what got me kind of stuck on the pit. And also, when I got into the pit, I had no chance of escape there, because I was literally sitting on the weapon mounting point and the underside of the chassis. We were going nowhere. We were fully stuck. There was literally nothing that I could do there. And yeah, it's just a kind of quirk of the geometry of this robot that, yeah, being pushed into that side of the pit meant a death sentence, and we were always probably going to go out being pushed there. So massive props to Antimatter for a very, very great shove and putting us in the pit and winning that fight. And of course, we lost it. But, you know, I am going to take a 5-1 record for a brand new build that I didn't think was going to do particularly well. That surprises me greatly, and I am over the moon with how well this whole robot has worked. I'm going to say a huge thanks again to Hugh and his robot Battlebot, who had actually used this system before I did and showed it to me and introduced me to it, because obviously it works amazingly well. Again, there will be a tutorial for this coming in the future, but I'm just blown away by this whole thing. Just beautiful. And with that, we have one more fight to go, which is a rumble. And I threw not enough side in the rumble because A, I like rumbles, and B, rumbles are where you take the most damage. So I thought if anything was going to break this weapon system, the rumble might.
2, 1, go.
So that was actually a really good test of the weapon system. We spun for basically the entire time we were still in the competition or in the rumble itself, did a decent amount of damage to other robots, didn't back down from anything, didn't stop spinning for any particular reason, did a really good job, and the weapon has come out of it unscathed. It still works, it still spins, it still runs. Beautiful. I mean, we even got, there's a robot in there, Slipstream's brother, that's built by the same builder and has a kind of anti-horizontal spinner hoop on the front of it, which you're supposed to bite into and not be able to break. We broke it. So this is just telling you how well this system performs. I will also say that right at the end there, when we got pushed down the pit, we actually took a shot from Broomhilda on the side, which snapped the wheel guard, but the wheel guard did nothing because the shock of that hit went straight through into the wheel, and it has actually forced this gearbox to become quite tight. So I had really no power on that side of drive anyway, and that was the side of drive that gets the most grip because it's the side of drive that has the weapon on it. So yeah, at that point we then got attacked by two different pushy robots, and we didn't have the traction, we didn't have the drive, so down the pit we went, and that was kind of inevitable. But yeah, on the whole, I'm very, very happy with this. This was an incredible event, considering how I put this thing together very, very quickly, and my hopes for it going into this event, I am blown away. I hope you have enjoyed that as much as I have, and I will see you in the next video.